I could still feel the sting on my cheek, as if her hand had left a permanent mark not just on my skin, but on my heart. My daughter-in-law's voice was still echoing in my ears, sharp, cold and full of venom, telling me to find somewhere else to live. And what cut even deeper was not her slap, not her words, but the quiet, shameful nod from my only son, standing just a few feet away, choosing her side. I had given him my life, every ounce of my love and strength, and in that moment, he tossed me away as if I was nothing. It had started so quietly, with me sitting on the edge of their expensive leather couch, my hands clasped in my lap, trying to remain calm. I had rehearsed the words in my head, thinking maybe if I said them softly, they wouldn't hit as hard. "I can't give you $50,000 for a cruise," I told her. My voice was steady, but my heart was pounding so loud, I was sure they could hear it. Sophie, my daughter-in-law, froze. She stared at me like I'd just insulted her very existence. The glossy brochure in her hand crumpled under her perfectly manicured fingers. "Excuse me," she said, her tone icy enough to freeze the air between us. I'd known her for 5 years, and I'd heard that tone many times. The one she used when she wanted someone to feel small, to remind them she had the upper hand. "You heard me," I said, straightening my shoulders. "I'm not paying for your anniversary cruise." The silence that followed was suffocating. My son, Michael, sat on the couch between us, his eyes darting back and forth like he was watching a tennis match. But I already knew which side he'd take. He always chose hers. Sophie rose slowly, her tall frame towering over me while I stayed seated. "I think you misunderstood," she said, her voice low but deadly. "This isn't a request." "I understood perfectly," I replied, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "And the answer is no." That was when it happened. The sharp crack of her palm meeting my face was so sudden, so loud, it felt like the walls shook. Heat spread across my cheek, burning deep into my skin. I froze, my hand instinctively touching the spot where she'd struck me. "Then find somewhere else to live," she shouted, her mask of politeness gone. "I'm tired of supporting a selfish old woman who can't even help her own family." I turned to Michael, desperate for him to speak up, to tell her she'd gone too far. Instead, he looked at the floor and said quietly, "Mom, maybe it's time you found your own place. Sophie's right. We've been carrying you for too long." The betrayal hit harder than her slap. This was the child I'd raised alone after his father walked out on us when Michael was just 3. I had worked double shifts at the diner, gone without, sacrificed everything so he could have the life I never did. And now, this. My voice trembled as I tried to hold on to some dignity. "I've been paying rent here for 2 years, I reminded him. "I help with groceries, with the utilities. I even gave you money for that down payment on your car." Sophie laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "Helped? You mean the measly $800 a month you toss us? Michael makes 6 figures. Olivia, your little contribution is nothing. Then why do you need my $50,000 for a cruise?" I asked, my eyes locking on hers. Michael looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his gaze that chilled me to my core, resentment. "Because we deserve it, Mom. We work hard. We've earned a luxury vacation." "With my money?" I asked. Sophie's lips twisted into a sneer. "Money you're just hoarding anyway. What are you saving it for? You're 62, you have no life, no friends, nothing. At least let your family enjoy it." I swallowed hard, her words hitting places I didn't want to admit were already sore. I had become isolated. I didn't go out much anymore. Sophie had made sure of that, always finding reasons why I couldn't attend a friend's birthday or why someone couldn't come visit. "I'm saving it for emergencies," I said softly. "Well, this is an emergency," Michael cut in, standing now with his arms folded. "Our marriage needs this trip, Mom. And if you can't support that, maybe you need to think about what family means to you." I stared at my son. This man who spoke to me now like I was a burden. My voice was barely a whisper. "I see." I stood, my legs shaky, and picked up my purse. "I'll pack my things." Sophie smiled, settling back on the couch. "Good. And don't think you can guilt us into changing our minds. Michael agrees with me completely." I started toward the stairs, my chest tight, my vision blurred. And then I heard his voice again behind me. "Mom, wait." I stopped, a flicker of hope sparking in my chest. Maybe he was going to apologize. Maybe. I'm going to need every penny from you. That 50,000. Plus whatever else you have saved. Consider it payback for all we've done for you. The spark went out. I didn't trust myself to speak. I just kept walking. Upstairs, I packed 2 suitcases and a box of old photo albums, the sum of my life in this house. By the time I came back down, Sophie was in the kitchen, her voice cheerful on the phone. Yes, Mom, she's finally moving out. I know, I'm so relieved. We can finally have our house back. I stopped for just a second, the weight of it all pressing down on me. This wasn't just being asked to leave. This was being erased. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, 2 suitcases in my hands and the box of photo albums pressed against my hip. They felt heavier than they should have, not because of their weight, but because they carried every piece of my life that still mattered. The photos on top showed Michael when he was 6. His hair sticking up in every direction, a gap in his smile where his baby teeth used to be. I had taken that picture the morning of his first school play. I'd been so proud, my heart swelling as he stood on stage in his paper crown. Now, he was in his office, door shut, hiding from me. I didn't need to see his face to know he wasn't going to come out. It was easier for him this way, to pretend he wasn't sending his mother out into the world with nowhere to go. I set the suitcases down for a moment and looked around the living room. The place was immaculate, decorated with expensive furniture Sophie had picked out. It smelled faintly of her perfume, a scent I'd come to associate with judgment and disapproval. Every corner of this house held pieces of me, yet none of them truly belonged to me. I was a guest here, and maybe I had been from the start. Through the kitchen doorway, Sophie's voice carried, light and almost giddy. Yes, Mom, she finally agreed to move out. Honestly, I can't believe she lasted this long. Oh yes, we'll finally be able to enjoy the place without her hovering. She laughed softly, the kind of laugh people use when they've just won something. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to pick up the suitcases again. There was no point in standing there. No point in hoping she'd feel even a flicker of guilt. Sophie didn't do guilt. And Michael? Well, maybe he'd forgotten how. Stepping outside, the cool evening air hit me like a wave. My old Honda sat in the driveway, paint faded, one hubcap missing. It was the only thing I still owned outright. I opened the trunk and began loading my bags, my hands trembling. Not from the cold, though it was brisk, but from the shock settling deep in my bones. Where would I go? I had no family nearby. The friends I once had been slowly pushed away over the years. Sophie's doing, though she'd always been subtle about it. One, oh, Olivia's not feeling up to it here. Another, she's busy with Michael there, until eventually, the invitations stopped coming. I slid into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The house loomed in my rearview mirror, warm light spilling from the windows. For a second, I imagined Michael would come running out, call my name, tell me not to go. But the door stayed closed. I turned the key, and the engine coughed before finally coming to life. As I pulled away, my chest tightened. I wasn't just leaving a house. I was leaving the last shred of the life I thought I had. I drove aimlessly, the streets blurring past. Families were gathering for dinner in homes I'd never enter. Laughter spilling out from windows. My own laughter felt like it belonged to another lifetime. An hour later, I found myself parked in a dimly lit gas station lot. I sat there for a long time, staring at the cracked asphalt under the streetlight, wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly. My bank account had enough to keep me afloat. $87,000 I'd saved over decades of backbreaking work. But it didn't feel like security. It felt like a lifeline I wasn't sure how to use. 4 years, I'd told myself I was building something for my family's future. Every extra shift I took at the diner, every tip I tucked away, every dollar I didn't spend, it was all for Michael. But sitting there, in that empty parking lot, I realized the truth. I hadn't been saving for them. I'd been chaining myself to the hope that if I gave enough, they'd finally see my worth. And now, the chain had snapped. I leaned back against the seat, tears slipping down my cheeks. The loneliness was sharp, almost physical. I had no place to sleep that night except the back seat of my car. I told myself it was temporary, just until I figured out my next step. But deep down, I knew something bigger had shifted. Somewhere beneath the grief, a faint ember was glowing. It wasn't hope. Not yet. but maybe the beginning of it. Or maybe it was anger. The kind that didn't lash out but waited patient, for the right moment to act. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't go back. The third morning of sleeping in my car was the hardest. My neck ached from the awkward position I'd curled into, my lower back throbbed, and the condensation on the inside of the windows made the small space feel damp and cold. I sat up slowly, wiping the glass with my sleeve, and for a moment, I just stared at the outside world like I was looking at it from behind a barrier. The world was moving on without me. Couples walking hand in hand, people sipping coffee from paper cups, a jogger in bright sneakers passing by with music blaring in his ears. I felt invisible, like I was floating on the edge of everyone else's lives. My gas tank was half full, and I didn't want to burn more fuel than necessary. But I needed air, something different, somewhere I could just be without feeling like I was in the way. I started driving toward the harbor, not entirely sure why. Maybe it was the sound of seagulls I could already hear faintly in the distance, or maybe it was the way the morning light bounced off the water, promising a kind of peace I hadn't felt in weeks. The marina was alive with movement. People hauling luggage, deckhands shouting instructions, the low hum of engines preparing to take massive ships out into open water. I parked in a small public lot and walked along the wooden planks, the boards creaking softly under my worn shoes. And then I saw it. A cruise ship so large it dwarfed every other vessel in sight. Its white hull gleamed in the sunlight, stretching endlessly in both directions. I stopped walking without realizing it, caught up in the sheer scale of the thing. I'd never been on a cruise before. The thought of such luxury had always seemed impossible. Reserved for people who could spend $50,000 without blinking, like Sophie wanted to. As I stood there, a figure moved into view on one of the upper decks. A tall man in a crisp white captain's uniform, silver hair catching in the breeze. Even from a distance, there was something familiar in the way he stood, the way he rested one hand lightly on the railing. My heart gave a strange, unexpected lurch. No, it couldn't be. I squinted against the sun, my breath catching as I studied his profile. The strong jaw, the proud posture. And then it hit me like a wave. James Harrington. My first love. The boy I'd thought I'd marry when we were both 22, before life had ripped us in different directions. I hadn't seen him in 40 years. Before I could decide whether to look away or walk off, he turned. His eyes scanned the dock, and then they landed on me. Recognition was instant. His face broke into a wide, warm smile that made my chest tighten. He raised his hand in a wave, and for a moment, I forgot all about the pain of the last week. I stood frozen, torn between running and staying. My hair was unwashed, tied back in a messy bun, my jeans rumpled, my sweater stretched out from too many nights doubling as a blanket. I looked nothing like the girl he used to know. And yet, James started moving toward me, walking quickly along the deck until he disappeared from view. Seconds later, I saw him striding down the gangway with that same confident energy he'd had as a young man. "Olivia Bennet," he called out, using my maiden name like no time had passed. Hearing it nearly broke me. My voice cracked as I called back, "It's Olivia Parker now." And then I wondered, was it? Was I still defined by a name tied to a family that had discarded me? When he reached me, I saw the years had been kind to him. His face was lined, but in the way that spoke of a life well lived. His smile was the same, steady, open, the kind that could make you feel safe without a word being spoken. "My God," he said, his eyes running over me with concern instead of judgment. "You look like you could use a proper meal and a strong cup of coffee." I let out a shaky laugh. "That obvious? I've spent decades reading storms in the clouds," he said gently. "And I can read one in your face just as well." Then he gestured toward the ship. "Come aboard. We'll catch up." I hesitated, instinctively glancing down at myself. I'm not exactly dressed for a cruise ship tour. He smiled softly. "Olivia, I'm the captain. I can invite whoever I want onto my ship. And right now, I want to invite an old friend who clearly needs someone to talk to." The kindness in his voice hit a part of me I didn't even realize had gone numb. I followed him up the gangway, every step feeling like I was crossing into a completely different world, one I hadn't dared imagine for myself in years. Inside the ship, I felt like I'd stepped into another life. The floors gleamed like glass, chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the air carried a faint, clean scent of polished wood and ocean breeze. James walked beside me, greeting crew members by name, his presence commanding but warm. I tried not to stare at everything, but I couldn't help it. Every hallway felt like it belonged in a luxury hotel. We passed lounges with velvet chairs, dining rooms set with crisp white tablecloths, and even a theater with rows of plush red seats. "This is incredible," I whispered, almost to myself. James smiled. "Wait until you see my quarters." When we reached his cabin, my breath caught. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the harbor, sunlight flooding the space. The room was bigger than most apartments I'd lived in, with a soft sitting area, a polished dining table, and a separate bedroom through an open door. It didn't just look expensive, it felt peaceful, like a place where life's noise couldn't reach you. "Coffee?" he asked, already moving toward a small kitchen area. "Yes, please," I said, sinking into one of the armchairs. The cushions seemed to swallow me whole, and for the first time in days, I felt my shoulders relax. He set a steaming mug in front of me and sat across from me, his eyes studying my face. "You look like you've been through a storm," he said quietly. "What happened, Olivia?" I took a sip of the coffee. It was rich and smooth, the kind you savor. My hands wrapped around the mug for warmth, and for a moment, I just stared into it, unsure where to start. "It's a long story," I finally said. "I'm not going anywhere until tomorrow evening," he replied with a small smile. "I've got time." So I told him. I told him about my ex-husband leaving when Michael was a toddler, about the years of double shifts at the diner, the aching feet, the late nights counting every penny. I told him how Michael had married Sophie, how I'd moved in to help them, thinking it was the right thing. I told him about the slow way Sophie had pushed me out of my own life. How friends stopped calling, how I felt smaller every year. And then I told him about the slap. About Michael's quiet betrayal. About packing my life into 2 suitcases and sleeping in my car for 3 nights. My voice cracked more than once, and I tried to keep my tears at bay, but a few escaped anyway. James didn't interrupt. He just listened, his jaw tightening slightly the further I went. By the time I finished, the coffee in my cup had gone cold. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Let me get this straight. You refused to give them $50,000 for a cruise, and they threw you out? After everything you've done for them?" "It sounds worse when you say it out loud," I murmured. "It's exactly as bad as it sounds," he said firmly. "That's not just ungrateful, Olivia. That's abuse." The word hit me like a physical shove. "I wouldn't call it that. I mean they exploited you for years," he said, his voice controlled but sharp at the edges. "And the second you stopped handing them money, they made you homeless. That is textbook abuse." I looked down at my hands. I thought that's what family does. Helps each other. "Family doesn't treat you like a bank," he said. "Family doesn't punish you for setting boundaries." I didn't know what to say. Part of me still wanted to defend Michael. Old habits die hard, but sitting here, in this room where I wasn't being judged or pushed aside, I could feel the truth settling in. James stood and paced slowly, running a hand over his jaw. "How much have you given them over the years?" I thought about it. 20,000 for their wedding. 15 for the house down payment. 2 years of rent and groceries. Probably another 60,000. His eyes widened. "Nearly $100,000, he said quietly. "And they still treated you like this?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Finally, he stopped pacing and looked at me. His expression unreadable. "What if I told you there's another way forward?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I'm not just the captain of this ship," he said slowly. "I'm part owner of the cruise line. Morrison Maritime. We have a dozen ships and routes all over the world. And we're expanding." "That's impressive," I said, unsure where he was going with this. "We need someone to oversee guest services for the whole fleet," he continued. "Someone who understands people, who knows what it means to make guests feel valued." I shook my head. "James, I don't know anything about the cruise business." "You know about hard work. You know about managing tight budgets, dealing with difficult people, solving problems quickly. You've been doing that your whole life." I stared at him. "Are you offering me a job?" He met my eyes. "I'm offering you a partnership." The words hung in the air between us, almost too big to take in. I stared at James, unsure if I'd heard him right. A partnership? The word felt too large for me, like a pair of shoes I wasn't sure I could walk in. He smiled, not the polite kind you give to make someone feel better, but the warm, certain kind that told me he meant every word. Yes, Olivia. You'd be part owner of the company. You'd have authority, responsibility, and a real voice in how things run. I shook my head slowly. James, I can't. I've never run a business. I've never even been on a cruise before. Good, he said almost with a laugh. You'll see everything with fresh eyes. You'll notice what others overlook. And I'll teach you the rest. You'll have the best mentor in the business. I looked out the wide windows at the sunlight glittering over the water. It felt unreal, like I was in someone else's life. Just a week ago, I was sleeping in my car, counting coins for coffee, wondering if I even had a future worth planning. Now, here was James, offering me something I hadn't felt in years, a chance. Why me? I asked finally. Why would you trust me with something like this? His eyes softened. Do you remember the last night we saw each other? Before you left for Chicago? I nodded. I remembered it too well. I'd been offered a scholarship, a chance to build a career. He'd just been offered his first position as a junior officer on a cargo ship. We'd both known our paths were pulling us apart, but we'd been too young to fight for what we had. I should have asked you to marry me that night, he said quietly. I should have found a way to make it work. But I let you go. And I've regretted it for 40 years. My throat tightened. I'm not saying this to push you into anything, he went on. I'm saying it because I never stopped caring about you. And if I can help you start over, if I can give you something they tried to take away, your dignity, your purpose, then maybe I can make up for some of that lost time. I set my coffee down before my hands could betray how much they were shaking. Outside, people bustled on the dock, loading luggage, boarding ships, living lives that felt 1,000 miles from the one I'd been living. For so long, I'd just been surviving. Now, maybe I could live. What would I need to do? I asked. My voice was steadier than I felt. He smiled. For now, learn. Spend the next 6 weeks in our offices by the harbor. Get to know how we work, meet the team, understand the business. Then, when you're ready, we'll sign the papers. I'll make you a 25% partner. You invest the $50,000 you refused to give Sophie. And this time it works for you. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same money that had caused Sophie to slap me and Michael to throw me out would become the foundation of a new life. Something inside me shifted. I didn't feel like a burden in that moment. I didn't feel like the discarded woman in the back of her own story. I felt capable. I took a deep breath. All right, James. I'll do it. The relief on his face was almost boyish. You have no idea how happy that makes me. The next few weeks were a blur. Every morning, I walked into the Morrison Maritime offices, a gleaming glass building with a view of the harbor, and sat at a desk that actually belonged to me. At first, it was overwhelming. Guest service protocols, safety regulations, staff management, vendor contracts. My head felt like it might explode. But slowly it started to click. The years I'd spent budgeting down to the last cent now became cost optimization across entire ships. The way I'd handled difficult customers in the diner translated into resolving passenger concerns with grace. All the skills I thought had been wasted on survival were suddenly valuable. 3 weeks in, James called me into his office. The sun poured through the windows, and a thick stack of papers sat on his desk. It's time, he said. I signed my name on the dotted lines, my hand steady. 25% owner. Vice President of Guest Services. For the first time in decades, my life didn't feel like something that happened to me. It felt like something I was building. 3 weeks after I signed the partnership papers, my phone rang while I was in my new office reviewing staffing schedules. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen since the day I drove away from Michael's house. Michael. For a long moment, I just stared at it. My stomach tightened, my pulse quickened. The old me would have picked up instantly, eager for even a scrap of connection. But now I let it ring twice before answering. Hello, Michael. My tone was calm, even, almost businesslike. Mom. His voice was tight, almost urgent. Where the hell have you been? I've been trying to find you for weeks. I leaned back in my chair. I'm exactly where you told me to be. living my own life. He hesitated. Look, about that night. Sophie feels bad about how things went. We both do. Why don't you come home, and we can talk about it like adults? I almost laughed. Come home? You made it very clear I didn't have one with you. Don't be dramatic, Mom. You know we didn't mean it like that. We were just stressed about money. And you decided your stress was my responsibility to fix, I said quietly. So tell me, what do you need, Michael? The pause on the line was telling. Look, we're having some cash flow problems. The investment Sophie made didn't pan out. I closed my eyes. What investment? She took some money from our savings for her friend's startup. It was supposed to be a sure thing, but the company went under last month. How much money? Most of it, he admitted. About 40,000. And now we can't make the mortgage payment. And the cruise line wants payment for our booking. So that was it. Not because they missed me. Not because they regretted what they'd done. They needed money. Again. I see, I said. And you thought I'd just hand over another 40,000? Mom, please. We're desperate. The bank is talking about foreclosure. And if we can't pay for this cruise, Sophie says she's leaving me. She can't be married to a financial failure. The old Olivia would have been in the car already, checkbook in hand, ready to rescue him. But I wasn't her anymore. Michael, I said, my voice steady, I'm not going to give you any money. Not for your mortgage, not for your cruise, not for anything. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You and Sophie spent your savings on a bad investment without consulting anyone. You made poor financial choices. And now you want me to face the consequences. But you have the money, he pushed. I know you do. How I spend my money is no longer your concern, I said, my tone cool. You made that very clear when you threw me out of your house. There was a long silence. Then his voice hardened. Fine. But don't come crying to us when you're old and sick and need someone to take care of you. Because after this, you're on your own. I smiled faintly. I'm already on my own, Michael. And I'm doing just fine. I hung up before he could respond. That night, James and I had dinner at a small Italian place by the harbor. I told him about the call while we shared a bottle of wine. How do you feel about it? He asked. Relieved, actually, I admitted. For years, I kept hoping he'd appreciate what I did for him. I thought if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, he'd finally see me as more than a source of money. But now I know that was never going to happen. He doesn't see me as his mother. He sees me as his backup plan. And I'm done being anyone's backup plan. James reached across the table, his hand warm around mine. I'm proud of you. It had been so long since anyone had said those words to me. And I realized in that moment, I was proud of me too. It was a Tuesday morning when James walked into my office with a curious smile. He had a clipboard in his hand and that look he got when he was trying not to give something away too soon. You're going to like this, he said, passing me the paper. I glanced down at the booking form, scanning the names. Then my eyes froze. Mr. and Mrs. Michael Parker. My heart skipped. You're kidding. They've booked a Caribbean cruise on the Sea Star, James said, his tone casual but his eyes sparkling with mischief. Your ship. I looked at him sharply. The one we're sailing next month? He nodded. Apparently, they found the money somewhere. Credit cards, maybe. The cruise they claimed they couldn't afford without your 50,000. I sat back in my chair, letting the irony sink in. They were about to walk onto the very ship I now co-owned. They'd be expecting luxury, pampering, and the same kind of unquestioning service they demanded from me for years. And they had no idea I'd be standing there, in a position to decide exactly how their vacation would unfold. What do you want to do about it? James asked. I thought about it for a long moment. Revenge wasn't what I wanted. Not exactly. But the idea of seeing them in my world, under my rules, without them knowing right away who I was, that was something I couldn't ignore. I want to be there, I said finally. Not to start a fight. Just to watch. To see them for who they really are, now that I know who I am. James's smile widened. Then it's perfect timing. We're launching our new guest services program that week. The vice president of guest services should be on board to observe operations firsthand. Vice president, I repeated, feeling the title like armor. Vice president, he confirmed. Olivia Morrison, to be exact. We'd started using the Morrison name for business purposes a week earlier. Officially, it was just to keep things streamlined in the company. Unofficially, it felt like I was stepping into a new identity, one untouched by Sophie's cruelty or Michael's betrayal. When embarkation day came, I stood on the bridge with James, watching the steady flow of passengers up the gangways. There was a hum of excitement in the air. 1,500 people starting their vacations, all expecting perfection. I'd been living aboard the ship for 2 weeks, shadowing department heads, learning the daily rhythms, and preparing for the moment I knew was coming. There, James said, pointing toward gangway B. I followed his gaze and saw them. Sophie first, of course. White sundress, diamond bracelet flashing in the sunlight, designer luggage rolling behind her. She moved with the entitled precision of someone convinced the world existed to serve her. Michael trailed a few steps behind, shoulders slumped, eyes scanning the ship with a mix of awe and nerves. They look exactly how you described them, James murmured. We'd planned my part carefully. I would be stationed near the guest services desk, appearing to review procedures, while in reality I'd be waiting for their inevitable complaint. It didn't take long. I was pretending to check a clipboard when Sophie marched up to the counter, her tone already edged with irritation. There's been some mistake with our cabin. We booked a balcony suite, and they've put us in a tiny interior room. Maria, our head guest services rep, kept her composure. I'm showing you in cabin 4127, which matches your booking confirmation. That's impossible, Sophie snapped. Michael leaned closer to her. We can't afford the upgrade. Don't embarrass me, she hissed. That was my cue. I stepped forward, my professional smile in place. Is there a problem I can help with? Maria looked relieved. Ms. Morrison, these guests are requesting an upgrade. Sophie turned to me, not a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Finally, someone who might actually know what they're doing. This young woman seems to think we can't afford a simple balcony suite. I held her gaze for a beat longer than necessary. Inside, I felt something shift, a quiet power I'd never had with her before. I'm Olivia Morrison, Vice President of Guest Services, I said, offering my hand. And you are? Mrs. Sophie Parker, she said primly. And this is my husband, Michael. We're here for our anniversary, and we expect a cabin with a view. I pretended to review their booking. I do see one available balcony suite, normally $5,600 extra. But, since it's your anniversary, we can waive the fee. There is one small condition. The suite comes with dedicated concierge service, which means you'll be working directly with me for the entire cruise. That sounds perfect, Sophie said, her smile stretching. We appreciate excellent service. I returned the smile, my voice light but steady. I'm sure you do. As they walked toward the elevators, Sophie looked smug, convinced she'd gotten exactly what she wanted. Michael glanced back at me, his brow furrowed slightly, like he was trying to place me. But he said nothing. Back on the bridge, James's eyes sparkled. They don't have a clue, do they? Not yet, I said. But they will. For the first 2 days of the cruise, I played the role exactly as planned. Professional, attentive, polite to the point of perfection. Every morning, I greeted Sophie and Michael at their suite with a warm smile and a printed itinerary of their day. I arranged their dinner reservations, secured them front row seats for the evening shows, and even made sure a bottle of chilled champagne was waiting in their room each night. Sophie lapped it up. She strutted around the ship with the air of a queen, bragging to other passengers about her personal concierge and how connections had secured her the best service on board. She never once said thank you, but that wasn't surprising. Gratitude had never been her language. Michael was quieter. He still hadn't placed me, though every so often, I caught him staring at me a second too long, his brow furrowed. He seemed tired, his smile forced whenever Sophie was in earshot. On the third night, I booked them a table at La Belle Mer, our most exclusive dining room. It was an elegant space, soft golden lighting, white linen tablecloths, the faint sound of a live piano drifting through the air. I'd arranged for them to have a window seat with a perfect view of the ocean. I also knew Sophie would find some way to complain before the appetizers even arrived. Sure enough, as soon as the maitre d' set down the menus, she wrinkled her nose. This table is too close to the kitchen door. I can hear plates clattering. It's the quietest section in the room, the maitre d' said gently. Well, it's unacceptable. Move us to that table by the fountain. She pointed toward the center of the room, where another couple was just being seated. I'm afraid that table is all ready. I'll handle it, I said smoothly, stepping forward. Mrs. Parker, the fountain table is booked for the captain and his guests this evening. But if you'd like, I can arrange for live music to be played closer to your table to mask any kitchen sounds. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You always have an answer, don't you? That's my job, I said with a small smile. She huffed, clearly irritated she hadn't gotten her way, but allowed herself to be seated. Michael murmured something under his breath that I couldn't catch. Halfway through the meal, the trouble started again. Sophie ordered the lobster risotto, then sent it back, claiming it was too creamy. She replaced it with the seared scallops, which she declared too dry. The waiter remained patient, though I could see the strain in his eyes. By the time dessert menus arrived, she had managed to insult the wine list, the bread, and the pacing of the meal. This is supposed to be fine dining, she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. I could get better service at a chain restaurant. I stepped in before she could push the waiter to tears. Mrs. Parker, I can assure you that our chefs prepare every dish with the highest standard of care. But if you're still unsatisfied, I can arrange a private tasting menu prepared just for you tomorrow evening. Her face softened slightly, pleased at the idea of something exclusive. Now that sounds more like it. I nodded. Then it's settled. But as I turned to leave, I caught Michael's eyes. He was staring at me intently now, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. His lips parted slightly, and for a second, I could see the exact moment the recognition hit him. Mom, he whispered, barely audible over the piano music. I paused, keeping my face neutral. Yes, Mr. Parker? He blinked, his voice still low. It is you. Sophie glanced between us. What are you talking about? Michael swallowed hard, his gaze locked on mine. Our concierge. She's my mother. Sophie laughed, sharp and disbelieving. Don't be ridiculous. Her name is Morrison. She's obviously. It's her, he said louder this time. I'd know her anywhere. The surrounding tables had gone quiet, sensing tension. Sophie's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing on me. Is this some kind of joke? I kept my voice calm, steady. No joke, Mrs. Parker. My name is Olivia Morrison, Vice President of Guest Services and part owner of Morrison Maritime. I've been overseeing your experience personally since embarkation. Sophie's face drained of color. Part owner. Yes, I said. A few weeks ago, I invested $50,000 into this company. The same $50,000 you demanded from me for your cruise. Michael's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Sophie's jaw tightened, her eyes darting around the room as whispers started to ripple through nearby tables. Well, she said finally, forcing a brittle laugh, I suppose this explains the excellent service. I gave a polite smile. It explains why I'm here. The service. That's just my job. I left them to finish their dessert in awkward silence, knowing the rest of their meal would taste far different than they'd expected. Back in my cabin that night, I sat on the bed and let the weight of the moment sink in. 4 years, I'd imagined what it would feel like to finally be in control when facing Sophie. I thought it would be pure triumph. But what I felt now was something more complicated. It wasn't just about winning. It was about finally seeing them for who they were, and seeing myself for who I had become. The next 2 days after the dining room incident were quieter. At least on the surface. Sophie kept her complaints to a minimum in public, but I could see the tightness in her smile whenever she caught sight of me. She didn't like being reminded that she wasn't in control. Michael, on the other hand, avoided me entirely. Whenever I arrived to check on their suite, he would suddenly need to step out for air, or disappear into the bathroom. But on the 5th evening of the cruise, as I was reviewing event schedules in the ship's atrium, I saw them approach together. This time they weren't dressed for dinner. No polished smiles. No performance. Sophie's hair was tied back hastily, her face pale and tight. Michael looked worn down, as though he hadn't slept well in days. Olivia, Michael said quietly, the way someone says a name they're not sure they have the right to speak. Can we talk? I gestured toward an empty seating area tucked behind the atrium bar. Of course. Please sit. Sophie sank into the chair across from me, her usual sharpness dimmed. For the first time, she looked unsure. We've been talking, she began, glancing at Michael before continuing. And we think we made a mistake. Back at the house. That night. I didn't answer, letting her fill the silence. We shouldn't have reacted the way we did. Things got heated and she stopped, biting her lip. We need your help. There it was. The truth under the apology. What kind of help? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Michael shifted uncomfortably. We're behind on the mortgage again. And Sophie's car. Well, it's about to be repossessed. If we lose the house, I don't know where we'll go. Sophie leaned forward, her voice dropping. If you could just give us a loan, we'd pay you back as soon as possible. A faint laugh escaped me before I could stop it. A loan? From the woman you threw out with 2 suitcases? Michael's jaw tightened. We were wrong. But we're family. And family. I cut him off. Family doesn't slap you when you say no. Family doesn't tell you you're no longer welcome under their roof. Family doesn't remember you only when they need money. Sophie looked down at her hands. We didn't think you'd change so much. I had to, I said simply. You made sure of that. Michael rubbed his face. So that's it? You're just going to let us lose everything? I met his eyes. No. Michael. I'm going to let you live with the choices you've made. The same way I had to live with mine. Sophie's voice cracked, the first crack of vulnerability I'd heard from her in years. I don't know how to fix this. I softened my tone slightly. Not for her, but for me. You start by taking responsibility. You stop expecting other people to clean up your messes. You stop living a life you can't afford just to look important. And you stop treating the people who love you like resources instead of human beings. Neither of them spoke. The ship's soft music filled the space between us. I leaned back. Here's the only help I'll give you. When this cruise ends, I'll connect you with a financial counselor I trust. She can help you create a realistic plan. But you have to follow it, and you have to do it without my money. Michael stared at me for a long time, something shifting in his expression. Hurt, maybe, but also understanding. Sophie, however, just pressed her lips together, the muscles in her jaw tight. Thank you, Michael said quietly. Sophie didn't speak as they left. That night, I stood alone on the upper deck, the sea stretching endlessly into the dark. For years, I had thought strength meant holding on to relationships, to obligations, to people who had no interest in holding me back. Now I understood something else. Strength was knowing when to let go. On the final morning of the cruise, I was standing on the observation deck, sipping my coffee as the sun rose over the horizon. The water was calm, the sky streaked with gold and pink. It was the kind of morning that made you forget, for just a moment, that the world could be cruel. I heard footsteps behind me. When I turned, it was Michael, alone. No Sophie in sight. His hands were stuffed in his pockets, his shoulders slightly hunched, like the boy I used to walk to school decades ago. May I? He asked, nodding toward the spot beside me. I gestured for him to join me. For a moment, we stood in silence, watching the sunlight shimmer on the water. Then he spoke. I wanted to say, I'm sorry, he said quietly. Not just for that night. For all of it. For every time I made you feel like you owed me something. I didn't see it then, but I took, and never thought about what it cost you. His voice cracked slightly, and I could feel the sincerity in it. You were my mother, he continued, but I treated you like a safety net. And when you said no, I panicked. Sophie panicked. We thought you'd stopped loving us. But now I see. You were just done letting us use you. I swallowed hard, my eyes fixed on the horizon. I never stopped loving you, Michael. That's the part you didn't understand. Saying no wasn't about taking love away. It was about finally loving myself too. He nodded, his eyes glistening. I don't know if I can fix everything. Sophie, she's not happy about how this trip went. But I want to try to change. I don't want to be the man who threw his mother out for a cruise. You can change, I said softly. But it's not about proving it to me. It's about proving it to yourself. The ship's horn sounded in the distance, signaling our approach to port. People were already gathering their luggage, preparing to disembark. Michael took a deep breath. Would you maybe come over sometime? Not to talk about money. Just to talk. I looked at him then, really looked. For the first time in years, I saw a flicker of the boy who used to run into my arms after school, grinning with scraped knees and sticky hands. Maybe, I said with a small smile. One day. When you're ready. We stood together for a few more minutes, the quiet between us no longer heavy with resentment, but lighter, like the first cautious step towards something better. As he walked away, I stayed at the rail, letting the sea breeze wash over me. I thought about everything that had happened, not just on this cruise, but in all the years that led to it. Here's what I knew now. Love without respect will drain you dry. Giving without boundaries will teach people to take without limits. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for others, is to say no. I had walked onto this ship carrying years of hurt and disappointment. I was leaving it with something far greater. My dignity, my peace, and the unshakable knowledge that I could stand on my own. The waves sparkled in the morning light, endless and free. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the same way.